Merry Christmas and a happy New Year. Originally, when I was writing this sermon, I was going to say something along the lines of, I hadn't seen many of you since Christmas Eve, and I'm still not seeing any of you right now, but it is good to be here on this Epiphany Sunday. Now, Epiphany doesn't officially end until January 6th, so that is still coming up later in the week, but on Thursday, as a matter of fact. But this is the Sunday we celebrated. It is the last day. It is, depending on where you start counting the 12 days of Christmas, it is either the 12th day of Christmas or yesterday was the 12th day of Christmas and today is its own special separate day. That's kind of what I go for. That's the way I generally try to count it, that Epiphany is its own special day. And then after this, we are back to ordinary time for a while. That's the time of the year when there is nothing special really that is going on, no major seasons, no major holidays. We are just preparing, we're just in kind of that middle time where we're going to spend some time learning and doing some things. But there's not anything special as we then get prepared for Lent to come. And so that's really the next thing that we're gearing up for. But with that, though, this is the time of year when new things start. Now, sometimes those new things, we call them New Year's resolutions. We go to try and start them. Now, New Year's resolutions have about a 50-50 chance of actually sticking around for very long. And these new things that we notice we start could be the stereotypical new things that we say where we're going to eat better, we're going to exercise more, we're going to do more with that hobby we want to do, spend more time with family and friends. You know, all of the things that come out at this time of year. We can go with those things. Some of these new things that we begin to start are things that we notice, that we look at and say, you know, I really need to do better at this. That's often where those New Year's resolutions come from. But sometimes, though, they come from somewhere else. More often than not, they come from someone else. And those are the things that we really need to pay the most attention to. Because they come from our blindness, things we don't see, we don't notice, we don't often understand even about ourselves or the world we're in at any given point in time. And so we need to hear those voices from the outside, or even just from the margins around us. Sometimes they could be folks like a doctor telling us you really got to do better at this because if you don't, your health is going to suffer. It could be a family member or a friend saying that you've got a bad habit that needs work. Now, be careful asking your spouse about that or your kids about that. They may give you a whole laundry list of things you need to work on. If you are that spouse and they ask you that, be very selective in what you say. But really and truly, we need to hear those voices. We need to hear those things. Now, the hard part, though, is knowing when to listen to them, because they aren't always right. Those voices from the outside and the margins aren't always right. And so what makes this challenging is that we have to really begin to understand and figure out what is right in what context and what time. What do we really need to listen to and what don't we need to listen to? As we look at the story of the wise men, we're in that same sort of position, believe it or not. And this is one that we've been building all through the season of Advent, and that in fact, if we look at it, one of the major themes of the Gospels is this very thing. It's voices from the outside and from the margins, helping the folks that are on the inside, the good religious people, to see something they've been missing, or maybe they didn't know or understand, helping them to see things in a new and different way, to see things that maybe need to be fixed. That's a theme that's easy for us to miss in the story of the Gospels, though, because we are so familiar with the stories. And because when the Gospels were written, we would not have been on the inside group. We would have been a part of the outside because there's not anyone here that I know of, really, that is Jewish. And so by definition, we would not have been on the inside part of this. We would have been on the outside of all of this. And so we often see ourselves in kind of that outside role. And yet, as time has gone on, as time has passed, we are not in that outside role. We are part of the inside. We have become the insiders there. Let's take a look at what was going on. Have you ever stopped to think about what it meant for a group of wise men from the east to come see the baby Jesus? They weren't Jewish. As a matter of fact, they probably weren't even Roman. So like they would have been several steps removed from where the believers would have been, from where the Jewish people would have been, from where the intended audience for this message would have been. They are recognized as being important because they obviously have money, have wealth, probably come with some sort of official recognition of some sort from their homelands. And Herod, of course, sees them as being important. Like when Herod sees this and he hears that they've come in, like he gathers a whole bunch of other people together to say, "Ooh, let's talk about this because here come these people from a faraway place, and they are going to tell us something very important. They are saying the Messiah has been born, and they all know what that means and what that intends." And Herod is afraid of that because he doesn't want someone usurping his authority and power as king. But these wise men, from all the indications that we have, don't really exercise the displays of power and authority that we might expect of a diplomatic envoy from a foreign land. That's something I've not really ever thought of too much until here recently. And as I think about this, do you know who the wise men really are? And this is going to continue to play with my head for a while. It has since I first started thinking about it, and will continue for a while. The wise men, you know what they are? They are religious tourists. They are the first century equivalent of American Christians going to like a Buddhist temple while on vacation. In modern terms, they would have brought their gifts to the baby there where they would have been staying, and then they would have pulled out their phones and taken selfies with the Holy Family just so they could put it up on their Instagram feeds and snap it to their friends and say, "Hey, look, here we are! Look what we're doing! That's the Messiah!" Their friends would be going, "What's a Messiah? We don't know what you're talking about." But I'm like, "This is exciting. This is cool." That's what they would have been doing. That was the wise men. And I'm kind of less impressed with them than I was before all of this, except for one really big important thing. And that important thing is that they were doing something that was very, very important. And they were calling out the people on the inside. They were saying to them, "There's something important over here you need to be paying attention to. Something over here that is a message that you need to hear. Something that maybe you're going to miss if you aren't careful." But the religious leaders of the time, I don't think really cared. They, from the indications we're given in Matthew, and there's not much that we're given there about this, they were deferring to Herod and were letting him handle this. They apparently didn't think a whole lot about this, and so they were just kind of letting that go. To put it into different terms, maybe bring this more up to a somewhat more modern time, the religious leaders of the time were completely ignoring what the wise men were saying because they were busy posting a lot of inspirational Bible quotes up on their MySpace page with the latest musical harp hit playing in the background. Now, if you're sitting there, if you know anything at all about social media and you're going, "What's a MySpace?" Especially if you're under like the age of 30, you might not know exactly what that is or have any clue. Is that know that it was one of the earliest iterations of social media and that there was a reason why it went defunct. It did a bad job of listening to the voices on the outside and adapting to the world that it was a part of, and so it got passed up very quickly by Facebook, actually. Herod understood some of what the wise men were saying. But really that was only because Herod was a paranoid jerk. I mean, let's be clear about Herod's role in this. He understood it only because he understood threats to his power that he assumed this child was going to be. And so that's where he was coming from in this. So he was taking these wise men, he was trying to lure them into his trap. Again, to belabor this analogy a little bit more, though, as the wise men began posting their return journey, they started using the hashtag that said "another way home," because they weren't going to go back the same way. They weren't going to go back to Herod because, for all their tourist tendencies, they were very smart individuals, and they may have heard from an angel or two along the way that said, "Go back a different way." How do we know that they were someone that was important to listen to? Because often the voices we need to listen to, they come from the outside and the margins. They don't come from one place. The wise men are some of the most important that we have in Matthew's gospel in doing this work, but we don't just hear it from the wise men. We go back to Luke's gospel. We hear it from other folks. We hear it in Luke chapter 1. It's an entire chapter about folks on the outsides and from the margins that are telling the folks on the inside that, hey, maybe there is something important that's going on here that you need to be paying attention to. It started even with the very reason why Luke was writing. Remember, he was writing so that the Gentiles could understand this thing. And because he was writing to Gentiles, this was like a direct shot across the bow for the Jewish folks of the time, saying, you really need to pay attention to this because you're about to get passed up. Stop posting on your MySpace page. Get over here and do something, see something important. But we hear these folks. We hear voices from folks we wouldn't normally hear from. We have an angel announcing the birth of a child to Zechariah and Elizabeth on the day Zechariah was going into the temple to lead worship in the most holy of holy places. Probably the only time in his life he was ever going to do that. And an angel comes and ruins his day. In fact, for the next 9 months, Zechariah can't talk. Zechariah, who was not really all that important a person, and yet this important message comes to him. It comes to his wife, Elizabeth, also, who then shares that message with someone else, with Mary, who had also received her own announcement from an angel saying, you're going to have a kid, and guess what? He's going to be super important. He is going to be the Messiah. There's a reason why she was afraid, because she knew that she was not anyone important. In fact, if we look at the story in the first... in the birth narratives that we have in Matthew and Luke's Gospels, the person that could maybe make the biggest claim to importance in any of this would have been Joseph. Joseph, who came from the line of David. But remember how long ago David had lived before that. There would have been a lot of folks that could have claimed a lineage to David. In fact, there's a reason why Bethlehem, when they got there, was so full that there was no room in the inn, because there were a lot of folks that could claim that lineage. It's important, but it was also very common at the time. So even Joseph wasn't as special as we might think. He would have been from the margins, almost even from the outside. And you get to the night of Jesus' birth, and you've got the first folks that come and recognize this important thing that is happening would have been the shepherds, who wouldn't have been at the lowest part of the social hierarchy, the pecking order there, folks that are important, but they would have been very close to the bottom. I mean, they wouldn't have been very far from that bottom level, and yet they're the first ones the angels go to say, hey, here's an important thing that's happening. All of these voices from the outside, from the margins, are saying, y'all need to pay attention. And that's when we begin to know that there's something there we need to take careful stock of. When it's not just one voice, but it's many voices. And not just many voices, but it's coming from many different areas. Shepherds, Zechariah and Elizabeth, Mary and Joseph, wise men from the east. Even if the modern legends are to be true, a little drummer boy. So you've got a musician you toss in there. All of that says maybe there's something that needs to be looked at. Why don't we bring this up on this Sunday, this Epiphany Sunday? And that's because as the church and as people of faith, we need to be listening to those voices, listening for those voices. Because for a long time, the church labored under this thought that we need to live in the world but not be of the world, which in its best of intentions, and I agree with the best of its intentions, means that we need to be a part of the world. We need to live in the world because that's where we find ourselves, but we don't need to be of the world. We don't need to absorb the very worst parts of the world around us. And we should be living our faith in a way that is not impacted by those worst parts. But man, that is hard. That is so very difficult to do. It takes work and it takes effort. And it's very easy to slip over into something else. Oftentimes that something else, it can masquerade itself in different ways. It can masquerade itself as legalism and just making sure that, us as people of faith saying, if you just do this X number of things, you check all these boxes, then you are going to be fine and you're going to be saved and you're going to be good. You're going to get into heaven. That's one way that it masquerades. Another way it masquerades is as a moral authority. Saying, these are the things we need to do, and we can call this moral authority. In some cases, we even call this social justice, and those terms get used very widely and very liberally, but aren't always used in the best ways possible. But those are the easy ways to do that. And what happens with those things is that there is this arrogance that slips into that. that we have to watch out for that says we know better. That if you just do as we want, as you just do as we direct, if you just listen to our prophetic voices, you, world, will be okay. But one of the things we have learned is the church doesn't always get it right. We know that. We've known that for a long time. We like to try and hide it. We like to try and stand away from it. But we know that has been a thing. That the church doesn't always get it right. We live in a world today where there are lots of voices who are trying to show us that maybe we've got some things we need to work on. That maybe there is more to this message than we are hearing right now because we've gotten ourselves caught up in so many other places. The hard part for us as a church, as people of faith, is figuring out which of those voices to listen to. To know which ones are giving us truth that we need to hear and which ones are things that we just need to kind of let go of and maybe say, y'all don't have that right either. That's the hard work we have to do. We have to be careful not to let that arrogance slip back in, though, because that will mean that we don't hear anything. Ours is the hard work of figuring that out, but as hard as that sounds, it's something that we have always been doing. We've been doing that from the time of wise men and shepherds and Zechariah and Elizabeth and all the other folks throughout the Gospels, even through Jesus' ministry as he reached out to folks who were on the margins, on the outside, whether it was the beggars, the tax collectors, disabled, or women even, because they were a marginalized group very much so in that time, even more so than today. Or even other religious leaders who wanted to hear more about what Jesus was saying, who kind of understood that there was something more there, but that immediately put them towards the margins because they wanted to listen to this heretical rabbi. Through Christ and through the work of the Spirit, we can do these things. We can figure out which voices to listen to. But to do that, though, we have to let go of the things that make that kind of listening hard. We have to let go of the arrogance that says the church has it all figured out, and that even if it didn't, at least we're better than everyone else. We've got to let go of that and say, we are just as fallible as anyone else. And we have to know, we have to recognize that it is a strength to say that maybe we were wrong, or maybe we just didn't understand, or maybe things have changed since we last learned about this. And what we once thought about in one way, now we know differently. And we reserve the right to change our minds again in the future as things change, as we learn and as we grow, and that's okay. Those are all okay things to do. And in fact, those are things we can do that are strong, that come from positions of strength. Because what that means is that in that moment, we are receiving God's grace. God's grace is given to people who know that we aren't the end-all, be-all, but that we serve the end-all, be-all. That he is the one who will guide us and lead us, who will help us to overcome it even when we get it wrong, and know that that is okay. And that is exactly as he intended, that he is there for us. Why else would he send his son into a world that was going to treat him so badly? But because he knew that he was going to then make that grace available for all of us that we needed, so that we can go forward, so that we can grow, and so not just so that we can grow, but so that we can bring others along with us, so that they can become stronger, so that they also can become the people that God intended them to be. Just as the first followers of Jesus began to hear these stories of wise men and shepherds and angels making announcements, and they began to hear this new message, and they changed in response to it. Let us be a people who do the same thing. And through that giving and receiving of grace, know that the world will be changed. Let us go and do this in Christ's name. Amen. I invite you now. It has been kind of fun to do this today. It's been a while since I've done it quite like this. But I invite you now, as we close out our service together, to remember and to take on a new habit this year. A new devotion, a new Bible reading plan. And I've even got a few more resources that we'll begin to talk about in the January newsletter. And as we go through things, I invite you to take a look at those and do something different this year. Grow in your faith in a new way. As we do that, let us go from here knowing that God calls on us to change, to hear voices from the outside and from the margins, knowing that they have something they can share with us, and know that it is okay to hear those voices, to hear those folks, and to respond. Because God goes with us. His grace is more than sufficient. And just for us to know that he is serious about that, he sent his son into the world so that we can know that truth. Let us go now in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen and go in peace.